Welcome to Up Late with Ben Northey, and thanks for joining me for this final video edition of this show. I'm getting a bit emotional even just thinking about that, but we are going to be transforming these interviews into a podcast format. There'll be more to come, so you can enjoy them while doing all kinds of things, exercising, doing the dishes, driving your car, pretending to work, having a bath. The possibilities are endless. And what started as a way to remain connected in lockdown has, for me, been a wonderful experience. This was so important to me during lockdown, and I hope it was for you too. It was an opportunity to meet and learn about musicians, their lives and pathways, hobbies and passions. And I hope we managed to lift people's spirits over the last couple of years to help keep us all sane and to highlight the essentialness of music and musicians in our society here in Australia and all around the world. And through all of our dozens of episodes, we've discovered that every pathway to a professional career in music is unique. And tonight's guest, I think, personifies that idea of uniqueness. And as always, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And it was wonderful to see we've entered potentially a new phase of our reconciliation journey with our new Prime Minister committing to embracing the recommendations of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. You can put any questions to my guest tonight by typing them into the chat window on YouTube. For those of you who are watching live, all of our episodes are online on the MSO YouTube channel. You can go back and watch any of them again. I'd like to thank our great friends and supporters, Tarrawarra Estate, for their support of Up Late with Ben Northey over the past 2 years. Thank you so much for that. It's really meant a lot. Can't believe it's been that long, actually. I think I've blocked most of that time out of my memory. But thank you to you, Tarrawarra. I am going to go the extra mile tonight and give you a wine review. So tonight, I am drinking the delicious Tarrawarra 2018 Pinot Noir. I opened this just before. Opulent and vibrant fruit with cinnamon and clove notes underlying red berries on the nose. It's beautifully textured and balanced. The palate delivers the same intense fruits as the nose while retaining an enigmatic restraint and a long, persistent finish. A wine to drink now or cellar for 10 years or more. Well, that's just not going to happen. Cheers to you, Tarrawarra. So to my special guest tonight, a person that I have the greatest admiration and respect for. She's a virtuoso performer, a creator, collaborator, curator, a cultural leader, something of an alchemist, in my opinion, a maker of things, of possibilities and of ideas. She's a musician working in many contexts with all kinds of people. She creates large-scale collaborative works across radio, film, dance, theatre and public art. She's premiered so many new works. I can't even imagine. I'll ask her for those. Loads of them have been written especially for her. So as well as a recorder virtuoso, an artistic director, she's a spokesman with a significant recording catalogue and a career as an international touring artist as well. We are so lucky to have her here in Australia and that she has chosen to call Melbourne home. A big Up Late with Ben Northey. Welcome to you, Genevieve Lacey. Yay.
Thank you, Ben.
Have you got wine? Are you
I do.
applied?
I do, but I didn't prepare such an eloquent review as you did.
You don't have to. I've gone beyond the call of duty, I think we can say.
It was pretty stunning, though. I was thinking if that had been a concert review, I would have sent it to my mum immediately.
Well, it's just that with the show, going to a podcast, I just want to keep that relationship strong for personal reasons.
I completely understand that, Ben.
But speaking of relationships and connections, we have a strong connection, the two of us, don't we? Because I know you didn't begin your life in Ballarat, but you spent a good chunk of it in Ballarat, didn't you? And that's certainly where we first met. Where you were at school in Ballarat at Loreto, is that right? Loreto College?
I was just down the road from you. And I have very strong memories of you as a teenager.
Do tell.
Well,
what's your memory of me as a teenager?
For any of you who don't know the glories of Ballarat, one of the great jewels in the crown in Ballarat as a young musician is the Royal South Street Eisteddfod. And that's a competition, but it functions as a really beautiful social meeting place, doesn't it, Ben? And something to aspire to, and a time that you can listen to your peers and your friends and be inspired and be excited and be just that little bit competitive. And every year you'd practice with great glee. And I remember one year in particular sitting in the audience, and our school didn't have a stage band.
Right, the jazz ensemble. Yeah.
Yeah, your school did. And I
sure
remember
did.
sitting, listening to the finals and watching you play and listening to you play and just thinking, I would put money on this man being an absolute superstar. It was written all over you. No, it's true, Ben. It was written all over you. You were so charismatic. It was so musical. It's just like, this one, he's going to make a career in music.
Well, I think the feeling was mutual. And I do remember, I think, being pitted against you, sadly, in a flute final under Somethings, which you just took the award away. I mean, there was no comparison. It was deeply hurtful. I'm still getting over it slowly, but it was unnecessary how good you were. But let's dig into that a little bit. But before we do, because this is sort of part, this is your life, part exploration of what makes you tick and your motivations and your sense of purpose. But I was fascinated to know that you were born in PNG. I didn't know that about you. I have no idea. You're the second person. The other person I've met was Megan Washington, the singer-songwriter. So how long were you there for?
We moved to Australia when I was 8. So really significant part of my
childhood. Quite a while, yeah.
Yeah.
And was that because your dad had a job there, mum and dad had a job there or something? Yeah.
Yeah, my father was an oral historian and went to the highlands of PNG to finish his fieldwork, his research there. And mum was studying linguistics at the time. So they, they were up for an adventure in life. So they took, I'm the third of 4 children. So the 2 boys and mum and dad moved to the Highlands. I was born there, my sister was born there, and then we moved to Port Moresby. So yeah, it was a glorious childhood.
What are your memories of it? I mean, what really stands out to you when you think of those years?
I just remember the freedom and being a sense of being outdoors all the time. So this really deep connection with nature and with where you are. I just remember being up trees.
Yeah.
And, being warm and at peace in the natural world. It was really beautiful.
Wow. And that must have stayed with you and influenced you in terms of what you have sought to express through your music, I suppose, even subconsciously. I'm really interested.
I'm sure it has. And I think the other thing that we've talked about in our family too was that it was a real privilege to grow up in a place where the country was so clearly not your own, where we were visitors and we were made incredibly welcome, but we were not the insiders there. And there's something about understanding what that is that really, I think, attunes you differently to being a guest in all sorts of places. It was that's really eye-opening in a lot of ways.
It's important for children, I think, to have those transient experiences too. So you moved around a bit, didn't you? Because you came back to Australia via Canberra and ended up in Ballarat. So what you were about sort of 9 or 10 when you got to Ballarat? Was that right?
That's right. Yeah, we were.
And what about so how did music sort of start there? Was that already happening, or was that something you were already doing in PNG?
Yeah, it did start in PNG because my older brother really wanted to play an instrument, and my family were able to get hold of some recorders, and I just needed to do whatever he was doing. So if he was playing the recorder, I was going to be playing it too.
Right.
There was a whole little gang of kids who used to play together, and it was a very joyful thing. And then when we moved to Canberra, there's a really legendary music teacher there, a woman called Judy Klingon, who has changed so many lives.
Always a teacher. It's always a teacher.
Exactly. She was an impassioned, brilliant educator. She's a composer, she's a choral director, and she insisted on you being a complete musician. So I couldn't just play my recorder. I had to sing in a choir. I had to learn about theory. I started playing the piano. She encouraged me to take up the oboe. So from quite an early age, it was important to me. And then, as you well know, in Ballarat, music's a really strong thing in that community, and we had incredible teachers, didn't we? So
we did indeed, and multifaceted kind of teachers as well. And I know that you studied with Helen Fairhall, who was
I
the
did.
stuff of legend in Ballarat. I think I had one flute lesson with her, and she's sort of thought, oh well, you're I think more on the jazz side of things that and I don't know, maybe I wasn't disciplined enough, but I could tell what an amazing teacher she was.
Yeah.
And so what, you studied flute with her, or was it recorder as
I
well?
studied recorder. She was a really passionate
Right.
and incredibly skilled recorder player. So
Yeah.
she was a very fine flautist as well, but she took the recorder very seriously. And
Yes.
she was one of those teachers who was so brilliant that they seed in you all these ideas and possibilities that actually as a teenager you don't understand.
Yeah.
But then 10, 20 years later, things will come back and I think, that started way back when I was 12 or
Yeah.
and she had a passion for contemporary music. So
Wow.
I
We Bit of a glitch in the video there, Jen. Sorry about that.
It's
I
all
think
right.
you're
We're back
back
now.
now.
Yeah.
I think you're back now. So yeah, you were talking about Helen Fairhall.
Yeah, and just how completely brilliant she was. And one of those teachers
Yeah.
who I think psychologically was brilliant too. She always knew what piece of music or what challenge to give to which child in order to sort of inspire or coax or cajole or insist that they take another step into whatever their musical education was. Yeah, she was completely amazing.
Teaching's a real vocation, isn't it? I mean, the best teachers, it's a vocation.
I agree.
And there's something amazing about teachers like that. Like, I think of people like Nahama Patkin. I don't know if you ever met Nahama. I
Sure.
think she was similar in that way. Like, that was her meaning in her life, was to teach these young minds. Richard Gill, he was like that as well, an amazing educator as well. So you also played the oboe, and I remember you must have had quite a bit of experience playing in the orchestra as well. And this is where the conversation around instrument becomes, a fascinating one, because as a fellow fringe instrument player myself on the saxophone, having, played other woodwind instruments also, but really loving that instrument, it's kind of a choice that needs to be made at some point as to whether you're going to play a proper instrument, or are you going to continue with the more different instrument choice. So how was that decision for you?
Oh, look, I think it was actually really clear to me really early, but I'm so grateful for I also played the piano and played it really seriously right through school. So that the chance to get my hands and my ears around harmony, I think, was invaluable.
Yeah.
And then those years of sitting in an orchestra, and as an oboist, you have the best seat in the orchestra. You're
right
just
in the middle.
completely haloed in sound. And that was glorious. And also to get the chance to play repertoire that doesn't exist for me as a recorder player, and to have an understanding of just the sort of grandeur and the beauty of those huge romantic works was very formative, I think. But I always felt at home on the recorder. I always just felt like all I needed to do was breathe into it, and it would somehow, we could communicate with one another. Whereas the piano and I tried so hard, but we never really made friends. And
welcome to the club.
Yeah. And the oboe and I, it's one of the instruments still that breaks my heart most easily, just with its incredible expressive ability. But I didn't have what it took to make those reeds.
That's a lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, you're going to be committing, years of your life to the making of reeds, aren't you?
But also, I think being a wind player or a brass player, and probably a percussionist too in an orchestra, probably being anything in an orchestra, I just think it's so hard. Like people laugh at me and say, well, yeah, you chose to be a soloist. It's not like that's easy. But in a weird way, it is, because there's a bit more, there's room to move, you know? And the thing about being an orchestral player is you have to be both exquisitely musical and expressive, and yet part of this huge, big organism. So you have to have this unbelievable precision and craft and still sound like no one else, you know? So it's a sort of impossible task. And anyone who does that well, I think they're phenomenal. It's much easier to just go out on your own road, I think.
Yeah, well, it's a different discipline, isn't it? That ensemble playing discipline, and subjugating perhaps some of your own expressive capabilities to be able to fit with somebody else, and
just serve that bigger goal of
the bigger goal. Yeah,
it says so much about what our world needs. I think the ability to do that.
I agree.
Yeah.
How do you then find a pathway? Because for an orchestral musician or even a jazz musician, I guess there are groups that you can then go and join. You know, you can join the Australian Youth Orchestra. I'm presuming, as a recorder player, you wouldn't have been able to do ANAM, for example. There's no pathway through ANAM for that as well. There's not anymore, at least, an ABC Young Performer Award, and you know, I don't know if it would have fit in that context either, you know, in an orchestral final. So how did you come to terms with that absence of a clear path?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had incredible role models, and again, beautiful teachers, and a community of people who were just, almost indescribably generous to me from the time that I was really young. So when I arrived in Melbourne to study, I was doing oboe at the con as well as doing recorder, and I was doing a music degree. So it's like I had three different lives, an English degree in the arts faculty. So I had multiple lives going simultaneously. And in all those communities, people just were so welcoming and so good to me. And in music, I fell in love with early music and with new music.
Yeah.
And I was adopted by professionals really in a way that feels like an apprenticeship from the time that I was 18. And I think you experienced a bit of this too, because I remember you playing professionally from the time that you were really young. And the kindness and the generosity of those older players who, in an informal way, became your big brothers and sisters, or your aunts, or your mothers, or your elders and your cousins in your tribe, and who allowed you to, you know, they just took you into contexts where, you know, when I think about what I was doing, you know, in strict and technical terms, I had no right to be there. But there I was, you know, being made welcome and just sitting alongside and playing with these amazing players. So there have been mavericks and trailblazers and incredible pioneers in the world of experimental contemporary music and early Australia for a really long time. And those people are dear friends and colleagues who gave me hints of what might be possible. And I suppose in their very being and their living, I saw that it was possible to choose your own path and make your own. And
what a realization.
Yeah, it's amazing. So whenever I talk to young musicians now, you know, that's, for me, one of the fundamental messages, that no one needs to give you permission to play. Nobody needs to tell you how you may play this piece in this context. Like, take the law in your life into your own hands. It's like, what do you want to do? What do you want to contribute, and whom and how, and just do it, you know?
I know. I remembered John Hopkins, my first conducting teacher, talking about that. Feel free to have a sip of wine at any time, Genevieve. I mean,
Thanks.
Cheers to Tarrawara Estate once more. I don't think we've gone far enough. I could do another review, but maybe.
And to our great mentors and teachers.
Well, he said to me, you know, I think you should come and study conducting. You know, start this master's program that I'm setting up at Melbourne Uni. And you know, I had done a lot of large ensemble playing growing up, and I'd done a lot of arranging and things, but I was still playing a non-orchestral instrument, and I hadn't had that mother's milk upbringing of the orchestral repertoire and all that kind of stuff. And I just said, oh, really, seems a little optimistic, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like it's hard enough at the best of times.
Yeah.
And I remember he just sort of looked at me, with this knowing gaze, and said, there's a German expression, wo kein Weg ist, machen wir eins. Where there is no way, we will make one.
Yeah.
And then he talked about this idea of alchemy, which I mentioned in my introduction of you, because you remind me of that, of making something where nothing existed before, of blazing a trail, of finding a pathway, of not being intimidated by the fact that you're making it up as you go. That realization that's actually the most exciting thing to do, isn't it?
Oh, it's really fun. Yeah. Because no one can tell you that you're going the wrong way, or that you're not doing something correctly, or it's glorious to be able to make your own way. And some mornings you can wake up and think, oh, I wish I'd had the support of AYO or ANAM, or and that sort of coterie of peers and all those experiences. And I can certainly be guilty of repertoire envy. I hear someone with a proper instrument play a glorious piece and just think, oh, I wish I could play that. But that's only a very tiny percentage compared to the absolute glee that I feel about the fact that, I can completely make it up.
Yeah, and it's an amazingly liberating repertoire that you play too, because of the fact that the instrument is so ancient, really. I mean, we're talking about 1,000-year history of the instrument. And so in that sense, it's a linking instrument in my mind from early music to modern music. And no one does that better than you do. Was that something that was always there aesthetically for you, that sense of taste and appreciation for these very distant, at least time scales, worlds of music? But I'm just interested in how you developed that aesthetic to sort of be interested so much in both equally.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm sort of thinking as you ask it. I mean, something about the nature of the instrument. There's something about the clarity and the purity of the sound and the directness that means that very kind of transparent early music, of course, it makes sense. And then it also means that the more abstract, ethereal contemporary music also makes sense. So there's something about the instrument choosing you from an early age, and then what the instrument does best starts to become entangled with what you love. And somehow, again, there is that alchemy between self and sound and the development of your own taste. And certainly when I think about my taste in visual art or architecture or literature as well, I always have lent towards really early things and really contemporary things. And the sort of period in the middle that most people think of as classical music, that's not where I live at all. And there is something about that somehow suits me.
It's fascinating. And we have a lot of younger musicians who watch this, and because they're interested in finding their own pathways into a career in music. And one of the things that I think it's important for them to know is how important it is to develop your taste, that your preferences, your tastes. And I kind of wish someone had told me that earlier, that that is very important. It's not enough just to play. It's not enough to just, I mean, I guess you're sort of doing it through that as well. But as you mentioned, those other worlds of art are so crucial in cultivating that aesthetic taste, and then you work out what it is you like and what you don't like so much, and you start making choices that guide you in certain directions. And I just think that's what makes you, isn't it? Otherwise, you're just a photocopy of another person doing the same thing. And the other thing that's interesting to me about what you said is that the part of repertoire that you're describing as sort of jumping is the part where all of a sudden people started playing music of the past, as opposed to contemporary music, which I'm presuming most of the music up to that point was, and certainly now is again. But there's this part in the middle where we kind of got stuck a little bit. I don't know. How do you think about that concept of when did we start playing so much music of the past?
Oh, I think it's sort of it's incremental, and I think it goes hand in hand with so many things. Like it goes hand in hand with acoustic properties of instruments, sizes of halls, people's desire for communal gatherings and size and scale of that. There's so many things that flow into this. And then in terms of the revival of early music, I mean, that to me really clearly came out of a whole lot of things, but it's a desire to not just relive, but somehow cleanse. It comes out of terrible world turmoil and pain and anguish, and a sense that somehow the intense subjectivity of the Romantic time led us down to paths that ultimately led to destruction and world war. So there was a real desire to sort of recreate a modern Arcadia where life was purer and simpler, and even the music itself was more democratic. So many, I think, in any moment in history where we're subject to so many different tides, aren't we? And many of them we can't see because we're in the midst of. But that's where what you said a moment ago to me is also incredibly important, that for me at least, art does not exist in a vacuum, and a life as an artist is not apolitical. We're part of a community, and as you rightly said, we make choices all the time. And so they're about our taste, they're about what we play, and they're about who we play it for and where we play it. And all those things then start to define who you are as a person and as an artist, and just what you think your role is in the world.
And I think you start to understand the possibilities of what music can do more as you explore those areas. I mean, coming back to Australia, I wanted to touch on as well, because I know you went to Switzerland, spent a long time away in Denmark, and you still actively tour internationally. The choice to come back to Australia and invent a space for yourself here, again with the alchemy, how was that decision made? Because I think we're both people who have an Australian career primarily. And I'm very interested by your choice to come back. What led to that?
Well, I was always so homesick when I was away. And while I, of course, can never fully appreciate the depth and incredible connection to country that our First Nations people in Australia have, I certainly feel a deep affinity with this place, and with its light and with its rhythms and with its space and with its stars. And all the time that I lived in Europe, even though I was completely intoxicated by being in a place that was so saturated in a whole lot of art and ideas that I'd been brought up with as being somehow so central to our formation as Westerners. The longer that I've lived here, the more I've begun to realize that, in the scheme of culture and culture making, that's just a blink of an eye, isn't it? And people here have been making culture and art and law and life and language for so many thousands of generations. And so to have the privilege of being in a continent where culture has always been central to life, and to be able to tap into that in any way that we can is just, it's so potent, I think.
Yeah. How do you go about curating? I know you've done a lot of this, and your services are highly in demand. You've got a role with Eucaria over in South Australia, don't you, as well? And those wonderful people there, Alison and the team there. When you're curating a program, because I think this is interesting also for people to understand how you build a program, a concept, what is the underlying motivation behind the combinations you end up finding. You've put some great programs together for the MSO as well. How do you go about that? What's that process for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I suppose there are multiple things operating simultaneously. For me, context is really essential. So who's invited me to do this? Who are the community? What do they need? What do they love? What are they challenged by? What is it at the moment in that place or in that context that is quiet or silent or not heard very much? I love the idea of giving space for voices that are gentler or that are sometimes overlooked. That's always been really important to me.
Yeah.
So for me, there's always a period of really trying to listen very deeply to who are these people? What is this place? What do they need or want? And then I suppose there's a part of me that often can't resist challenging that a little bit. So there's a part of me that says, well, these are the things that you hold dear, and I understand that, and I will do my best to respect that. But look over there. There's all this stuff that you might not have encountered yet. Maybe I can find ways to bring that into a frame of reference that you know and love, and perhaps bring some new ideas to you and some new sounds to you. I suppose for me as a curator, that's always the greatest joy, to be able to bring people and compositions and most of all ideas to a wider group of people, and potentially to give them the chance to encounter things that they might not have discovered before. And also very often by setting things beside, I think, again, as you mentioned earlier, I have this love for very early music and very new music. And I find often the juxtaposition of those two, if you do it really carefully and thoughtfully, they can shed light on one another in a way that's truly illuminating.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, that's a great and joyful part of the alchemy of curating, is about, well, what happens if ... So
well, I think that was the...
Sorry, you go.
Well, I was just going to say that was the beauty of that Birds of Paradise program that you did last year with the MSO, which we're talking about off air, was one of the very few things that the MSO did last year. I mean, we started in a blaze of glory and petered out very quickly with the lockdowns, and that was sort of later in the year, wasn't it? Like, I can't remember exactly when that was.
It was in April.
April, I was earlier. Yeah.
So it was just before life became quite cloistered again.
That must have been amazing. But that was fascinating. You had a real mixture of repertoire, exactly what you're describing, that extraordinary work, Absolute Bird, of Hollis Taylor and John Rose. And I found that was a great example of that, and a great example of how you also present musical experience. It's not always just a straight kind of musical performance on a stage. I mean, there's always a sense of theatricality in presentation for you. Do you find that important? Do you feel that there's an important role to play in the way that we think about how we present our concerts to people?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important, because when people come to experience something live, they're seeing it as well as hearing it. And to me, it's incredibly important to think about the order of the pieces and where you can make things seamless, so that there's this kind of magical transition from the 16th century to the 21st century. And the tracing of an idea, for me, is always the absolute center point in any kind of curatorial experience. For me, it's actually never about repertoire. It's about what would happen if you tried to trace the experience of light in sound. Okay, if you want to do that, then what are the building blocks that you can assemble in this context in order to do that? So, yeah, I think that sense of something unfolding is really important.
And how do you design that extra musical element? Because I noticed on your website, when you've got your featured projects, they're so incredibly well designed in terms of the role of the visual media and the way that it looks, the theatricality of the presentation, the incorporation of technology. How are those decisions made? Is that a collaborative kind of effort with others?
Yeah, always. Yeah, I mean, the only reason, Ben, that if ever I do something that looks really stunning, it's because I've got incredibly clever friends, and who are lighting designers, who are filmmakers, who are dramaturgs, who are directors, who are, who come with this sense of creating experiences and creating whole artworks, and say, well, the sound, of course, that's the central element, but how do we create a world in which listeners can listen even more deeply, because all of their senses are engaged in a way that sort of takes them deeper and deeper and deeper into that dreaming space. So yeah, that's the great joy of my life, I think, is having brilliant, generous friends who happen to be collaborators.
I'm very interested by it because from the orchestral perspective, it's certainly a conversation that is in there in the ether, and there are competing ideas. And I think everybody understands that there's great potential in the way that orchestral concerts are presented, and updating that concert experience is important, and making sure that it's incredibly impactful for people. If I was being cheeky, I mean, would you? How can I put this? Do you think that is an audience experience that is in need of some updating in its? Yes, yeah,
Absolutely, I do.
Yeah.
Because people in a contemporary world are so used to incredibly sophisticated experiences.
Yeah.
And we as a community very often are not acknowledging that and not addressing that. And we have this expression that we use very often as musicians, and we say, well, you need to let the music speak for itself. And I sort of think you can only say that if you're as steeped in music as we are. Like, we have the privilege of so many decades of experience and education. And so, music's our home, it's our language, it's our métier. So we don't need explanations. We don't need entry points. We don't need, but for a lot of people, the places that we present and the ways in which we present are forbidding and foreign. And for me, because I love music, and I think it's one of the great, it has such power for good and for sort of really compassionate, subtle, beautiful, important work in the world. I feel really passionately about trying to make any musical experience that I'm part of as welcoming as possible for as many people as possible. And for me, that is never about any ideas of making something more commercial or dumbing it down or marketing it, or any of those things. It's no. It's about welcoming people so they can just sink into sound and feel magic,
Yeah, and have a transformative experience, an unexpected experience. It's great to hear you talk about that, and I think there's so much to learn from the way that you think about the coming together of all of these different elements. It's like a Gesamtkunstwerk. Again, it is a total. We need to think of it in that way, I think. And you're right, the perspective is so important, because our perspective, and often we sort of think we know what an orchestra should want, and so we give them that, but actually what they want or need or desire is something different. Let's talk about some of your more specific projects before we get some questions from people. The time's just evaporated as usual. I mean, this is just so great to catch up with you, Jen.
Yeah, you too, Ben.
We could talk, I know, for a long time, and we'll have to pick up this conversation over a cup of coffee in Brunswick at some point.
Delicious glass of wine.
Yeah, see, you're getting the hang of this now.
I am.
You're picking it up. That's exactly how it works. So let's talk about Well, firstly, maybe Pleasure Garden, because that was a project that I think does speak to what you've just said around the bringing together of an experience and a musical experience, an experience of nature in this case. How did that come about, and what was your idea behind that?
Well, this project, I think, began when I was about 8. So the wonderful music teacher that we were talking about earlier, Helen Fairhall, told me this story when I was a little girl, as she handed me a piece of music, as she often would, about this man called Jakob, who apparently was blind and used to wander through a garden playing his recorder. And I just thought, oh, that is brilliant. You know, I had no idea that Jakob lived in the 17th century. I thought Jakob was probably just down the road. And Jakob and I, honestly, we became friends from that time. I spent a lot of time with him over the years. And I'd always, something about that really lodged deep in me, the idea of experiencing music just in this beautiful kind of transient state of someone wandering past you playing something while you happen to be in a garden. So, you know, I guess it was brewing away for a long time, and I happen to love his music. So this is a Dutch composer called Jacob van Eyck, who's completely unknown to anyone but recorder players, but we love him dearly. So yeah, I'd been thinking about him a long time and playing his music a long time. And then one day, my mother is an amazing gardener, and I grew up in a very beautiful garden, and I got the gardening bug. And I was in this gorgeous garden with my mum in country Victoria and looking at it and thinking, oh, suddenly all these things started to come together. Because the other beautiful thing about the collection of works that was published of Jacob van Eyck was it was called the Flute's Pleasure Garden, and this whole idea of what's a pleasure garden. So there I was wandering through this garden thinking, wow, this is a kind of a European form in contemporary Australia. And so it's acknowledging both these old patterns and forms of the past, but yet it's got contemporary Australian plantings. And then I thought, oh, that's what I need to do with Van Eyck. So then I sought to create this contemporary pleasure garden. So as you said, I'm often interested in using technology as a way of kind of enhancing the magic of experience. So a whole team of us worked on this for a very long time, and we transformed upturned plant pots and bird boxes into speakers. And through these speakers came field recordings, all kinds of contemporary compositions, as well as the pure music of Jacob van Eyck. And there was a series of sensors that we distributed through a garden. So we were thinking about the garden like an instrument. So the instrument only came alive when people were in it, and their movement affected the way the garden was played.
Wow. So it's like the garden's alive with sound.
Yeah. So it was a glorious project that took us years to make. And prior to COVID, was traveling quite a lot, and we hope we'll start taking root in all sorts of places again before too long.
I'm sure it will. I have sort of deliberately avoided talking about the COVID era, only because I find it too triggering. And as I said, I seem to have shut most of it out. I suppose what I would ask about it is the legacy of COVID, of the impact that COVID has had on our sector here in Australia. I mean, talking about it from our own perspective, it sort of speaks, I suppose, to the state of music in Australia, the fact that we had to draw so much more on our own artists. We had a renewed focus on our composers, certainly at the Melbourne Symphony, that was true. Have you observed a change? And I guess this is beyond the COVID era, because I know how much of a finger on the pulse you've got in Australia about the state of music. Have you observed a change over the last, say, 5 to 10 years even, artistically, in terms of the priorities or the focus that music seems to have now?
Oh, so many changes, Ben, and this is a huge big conversation. But I suppose if we go with the silver lining scenario, I think that your observation of the sort of enforced focus on Australian music and Australian musicians was a glorious thing. And in many ways, I would argue it was long overdue. And I have loved seeing the generosity of audiences and people's renewed or newly discovered commitment to Australian artists and Australian music. And ideally hope that as we navigate our way into whatever's next, we don't lose sight of that, because it's been so inspiring to have our own community celebrate the incredible artists who are here. So I think that's been really wonderful. And I think also the passion and the loyalty and the generosity of audiences, I think a musician would just say that has been overwhelming, that the number of people who in so many ways have showed us how incredibly important music is in their lives.
That's right.
And it's been profoundly affirming. There've been a whole lot of other things that that have been really deeply challenging, and I wouldn't.
There's been damage, hasn't there? There's been damage.
I would say that there's been irreparable damage. On a personal level, for many individual practitioners, for organisations, be they tiny and independent to major, national performing arts countries, across the board, there has been wholesale carnage. The number of people who have had to leave their vocation, not just profession, but their vocation.
Young people too, as well.
People of every age. So for young people, there was no entry point. They couldn't take flight. People in the middle of their careers, suddenly the juggle of trying so hard to earn a living and feed a family, it's just like, we cannot do that anymore. And people, established, beautiful artists who are our elders, who had no savings because they've had as freelancers, like so many people have been forced to leave, and I think the loss is incalculable. So while I'm quick to go to optimism and opportunity, I think that as a community we need also to say to one another and to a broader community that this was no small thing.
No, and to recognise the impact of some of the decisions that were made during that period as well, around support and funding and opportunities. There were some great things done as well, but there were also some really savage things done as well. It's been very difficult. I mean, do you think music, I think I know this is a rhetorical question, but in terms of the connection with you, the performer, and the listener, what do you think there's that healing potential? Because we're all kind of coming out of this with scar tissue. And so is that something tangible that you kind of feel is different now?
I suppose I've always had a really strong belief in that. I think music has extraordinary healing potential, and there's something about its ability to gather people together to listen to one another, to just sit quietly and to leave the distraction of a modern life and all the stresses and strains and all the competing interests and all the ego and all the fear and all that, and just to actually be still and surrender to sound is so potent, and I think has never been more important. And I think as musicians, we often forget that that's one of our greatest skills. Like we're consummate listeners, we're trained listeners. And that makes us really useful in our communities. Sure, we can make glorious sounds, but also we can read a room so amazingly because we are attuned to every nuance, whether it's heard or unheard. And so musicians' role in rebuilding and helping people to create families and communities that have been separated and shattered, and to have confidence to gather again and to start to imagine how we could make things better. You know, we've got so much to offer, and to me, that act of listening and gathering around music is central.
That's a wonderful answer, Genevieve. Thank you so much for that. There have been some questions that have come in. This is an interesting one. What is your fantasy dream project that would make you jump up and down with glee if you were able to make it happen? I get the feeling it's probably one that you're already working on, because I feel like most of your projects are a bit like that. But
it's so true. Yeah, I reckon I'm working on 3 or 4 at the moment that make me jump up and down with glee.
Every day, start the day with a good jump up with glee.
I do. But I love that question, because there are always things that you're trying to realize that you can't quite yet. So there's one that I've been working on for quite some time, and it's a collaboration between an Antarctic research scientist and a visual artist and a group of musicians. And it's really about, well, in First Nations terms, it's about listening to country. It's about how we attune ourselves in sound and in kind of in all of our atoms to understand what our impact is currently on this precious planet. And for the scientist that we're working with, who's a passionate arts lover, he feels that statistics and facts in terms of our climate emergency are not really cutting through, because for most people they become paralyzing, whereas again, music and the arts have a huge role to play here, because as you spoke earlier, they can be truly transformative. So how can we use the very powerful experiential
it's a slightly more abstract way of communicating that information, isn't it? That is equal. It is more impactful somehow.
Abstract, but also embodied and sensual, and something that's sort of a little bit, so it's both poetic and abstract, but it's also tangible, because you're in the middle of sound and visuals, and you're going, it's
emotional. It's an emotional connection to it.
That's a project that's I'm being fantastic inarticulate about, sorry, but we are working on.
That sounds wonderful. Some nuts and bolts questions now, Genevieve. I know you've got 24 or 25 different recorders that you play. How has the way you practice changed over time?
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, it's changed so much.
Yeah.
And I think any musician would probably say that. So there's a time in your life when you're grappling with mechanics, I suppose. And to be honest, that never goes away.
The technique,
I was doing a recording session today and beating myself up about, intonation. And I, turned to my beautiful colleague and said, "Do you think you ever get to a point where you don't have to panic about this?" And he said, "Probably only when you did." So
now you take up conducting. That's what you do. You just take up conducting. That's the easiest solution.
Well, then you worry about everyone else's intonation. So
that's true.
Yeah, but how has it changed? I hope. I think practicing is about problem solving, and I think it's about listening. And I think that I am getting to be a better listener as I get older. And simply because I've got a longer context of things to set any sound inside. But also I think at different points in your life, you are listening for different things and striving for different things. So there's a time when I was really obsessed with technical mastery, I suppose. And now I am more and more and more obsessed with this idea of expressivity. How do you wring every last drop out of every sound that you make and make it as truthful as it possibly can be? So that's what I'm wrestling with all the time with my practice at the moment, because I think that technique can then become a shield, that you can make everything so smooth and so beautiful, and you get sort of fixated on how you just make it all gloriously effortless, rather than sort of stripping it right back and saying, well, actually, what am I trying to reveal about humanity here? And maybe it's not about it being perfect.
Yeah, well, so many of the great moving performances are not perfect, are they? It's the imperfection that connects us to the performer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sometimes that idea of the filter that we are, the music comes through, it still comes through with us attached, even if it's music of other people. I mean, I've always really liked that idea. There's another question here, just sorry to jump around a bit. We've got 5 minutes left before my Zoom subscription runs out. That's not entirely true. Do you ever perform amplified? Because that must be a challenge on the recorder. So someone's asked here, do you ever perform amplified to compete with bigger forces around you?
Yeah, I very often do, actually.
Okay.
And have a whole series of different techniques depending on what the context is. But quite often I will wear a microphone, just a little tiny radio microphone, in order that an audience won't even necessarily know that I'm amplified, just the way that classical guitarists often do too. And a speaker will be just behind me or behind the ensemble, so that it's kind of imperceptible magic that makes me a little bit bigger. I'll often attach microphones to the instruments directly. I've worn them on my wrists.
Wow.
In all sorts of different contexts. Again, as you mentioned earlier, Ben, I'm actually really interested in technology and how we can play with sound in all sorts of domains. So that's something I love to do.
It seems very natural. There's another question here. I think this is too big to end on. What is the purpose of playing music?
Well,
I mean, you know, if we could distill it down, well, let's reframe that. Do you have a guiding purpose that is able to be distilled into a few sentences, or not, or you do?
Yeah, in a sense I do, in that I think of that I like to try to connect people and ideas through sound.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So,
perfect. No more needs to be said.
In any context.
Yeah. Genevieve, I'm so glad that you were my final guest. It's just been, because the whole thing really has been around purpose and the why of why we choose this world of music. You know, I mean, so crazy. But I just think we've touched on so many of the answers to that tonight. So thank you so much. And I know that everyone at the MSO can't wait to work with you again. And I'm sure we'll see you collaborating with the orchestra very, very soon. And so what's next? What's the most immediate kind of next thing for Genevieve Lacey?
Well, during COVID times, I gave myself the challenge of trying to think up. Well, it was a necessity. I had to work out how I was going to earn a living without traveling and without being in front of a live audience. So it's like, okay, how do you use your skills and do that? And one of the projects that came to light through that time was about creating a sound installation for the National Museum in Canberra. So
wonderful.
It's very exciting. It's massive. It's terrifying. And I've just finished a whole run of performance opportunities, and now I am going to go into deep hibernation to see if I can pull this off.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I hope to get the chance to get up there and have a look at it when it's all finished and completed. Wish you all the very best with that, Jen. And I hope we get to catch up in person.
That sounds great.
Considering we're basically a kilometre away from each other over Zoom. It's strange. But anyway, that will happen. Thank you again for being with us tonight.
Ben. You're
welcome.
Host. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm, I've had a fair bit of practice at this now. And after a couple of wines, things loosen up. It's nice. A big thank you to David McKinnon at CVP, all the people behind the scenes here that make Up Late with Ben Northey possible, Jonas Anderson from the MSO, G. Mishra, been along for the journey. She's not with us tonight, but she's been an amazing person behind the scenes, putting this show together. There's a team of minions, people behind the scenes. You don't get to see them. All of the people at the MSO production team, thanks again to our friends at Tarawara Estate, and all of the wonderful musical guests who have appeared on Up Late with Ben Northey. It's been so special to be able to share their stories with you. And don't forget, we'll have more interviews in podcast form coming soon. I think the first one might even be with Eddie Perfect. So keep an eye out for that on the MSO socials. And most of all, thank you to you for watching, for your wonderful questions. And I hope to see you at a concert again soon. Keep looking after each other and go well. Cheers, Jen.